Hello everybody. So I just joined a friendly Swiss league for Ixalan. Um, so I have not looked at the cards yet because Magic crashed on me, but I should be able to go in and edit the deck shortly. So I'm pretty excited about playing in this sealed league because over the weekend during the pre-release I played a black-white vampires and good stuff deck that took me 4-0 in the local paper competition. Um, First time I had done better than 2-2, I'm pretty happy with how that went, and I'm hopeful that I can do something similar with this league. So let's get into it. So I'm a big fan of following everybody else's way of kind of sorting cards, of looking at what do we have in the mythics and the rares slots, just to see where our pool might be pulling us a little bit. So we've got Entrancing Melody, which is pretty cool, but it is a little overcost for just a thievery spell, and sometimes it'll sit in your hand, or sometimes you'll just take a mediocre creature, but it is something that's worth playing. Boneyard Parlay. Somebody played this against me and it was pretty annoying once they do have enough targets in the graveyard. The choice was really tough to figure out which way to split it, and it definitely meant that it was a lot harder to break through my opponent's board, and it stalled the game out for a decent amount of time. So I'm not always a huge fan of cards like this, just because of the amount of life that they can take. So this has to be used in a very aggressive deck, otherwise I'll end up clocking myself out. This is pretty cool to just hopefully overwhelm the opponent, and with Menace it usually can get through, so you can definitely create a lot of pirates with this. So I think people are pretty excited for Dowsing Dagger. The plant creatures people did find to get in the way a little bit, but they did really enjoy the fact that the stats on it were just enough to make it playable, and the impact of adding 3 mana is totally worth it. And then we've got Primal Amulet, which is good, but unless you're really spells heavy, it's not going to help out a lot, and you're not going to be able to get the same payoff that you need, but we'll see what we can land later on. So looking at the entire board, I'm just going to go across and see what's playable here. So that's okay. 3/3 Vigilance with Explore is serviceable. Pious Interdiction is definitely good. Any sort of pacifism effects are playable. That's just sort things by color here. Looming Altasaur is it definitely seemed like that was stalling or clogging up the board quite a bit for people. So it's not amazing, but it's not bad. Another pacifism with Ixalan's Binding is really awesome. It's a little bit better than that. It's more of a Oblivion effect. I had this in the pre-release, and it definitely was helpful. This is okay if we end up going black-white vampires or something. So we can toss that in for the moment. This is not quite what I want to see. Life Gain did really help me out over the weekend to stay alive with the deck, so it shouldn't be too bad, but it's kind of a little more filler than I would like, so I'm going to leave it out for the moment. 1/3 flyer for 2 is serviceable. It helps block things if you need it, and can get into damage later on, and if we pair that with the Dowsing Dagger, it can definitely do some work for us. Raptor Companion is definitely good in an aggressive deck, just because of the 3-1 stats for 2, but it does get picked off fairly easy. And I did notice that smaller creatures weren't as good. They got outclassed way too quickly, so we'll see if this ends up making the deck. I had Slash of Talons, and I definitely noticed that it did quite a bit of work for me over the weekend. I was able to take out a lot of smaller threats, which was cool. And now we've got the Caller here, an 0-3 for 1, and Dinosaur spells cast 1 less to cost. Just isn't quite enough that I'm excited to play it, so I'm going to hold off on putting these in, just because I don't think they're quite worth it. So let's try putting the Melody in. The Prosperous Pirates were quite nice because they're sizable, and they do get you to 7 mana on turn 6, which is really nice. And I have 3, so I don't know if it's worth playing all 3, but let's toss them in for now. Especially if we end up playing things like the Melody, or if we do get this Boneyard Parlay running for us. Unblockable is always good, and it lets you bounce a creature on our side if we want, for any enter the battlefield effects, or if there's an enchantment or something on one of ours, say like a Pious Interdiction that we want to get rid of. Card draw is nice, but it's not quite amazing enough, but we'll just toss it in for now and see if we end up cutting it. It's always great to get an extra card, and I found that attacking was pretty much always on the menu, so there's no reason to really not play that. For 1 for 3, that creates a treasure token, is serviceable. It's not amazing, but we can put it in case we want to play a little bit of a control deck. I'm not seeing a lot of merfolk on our end, so I don't think this is going to be worth putting in. Pirates might be a possibility, so I can toss this in for what we might have going. It's still not one of my favorites, so I might get the Axe first, because it is just a one-sided bounce. This is serviceable, as Unblockable is still pretty nice, but it is merfolk, and it's not looking like we have a ton of merfolk except for this Storm Sculptor. So I'm not super thrilled about the sneak, but we can keep it around just to see. I don't really like the keepers. They're just too weak for the early game and not great enough for the late game with the 8 cost. Opt. It's always wonderful to draw a card for 1, and the fact that you just get to scribe beforehand makes this quite worth it. So I'm going to toss that in. Looking at black, Boneyard Parlay definitely is serviceable if we're able to get enough creatures in all graveyards. The effect for 7 is still expensive, but the impact on the board can be quite worth it. A 4/4 flyer for 6 is serviceable, so we can toss that in there. I played with this over the weekend. I did enjoy it. It was nothing amazing, but it often landed as a 4/4 with lifelink, which is pretty nice. But it might also be too much for a deck to sustain, so it's definitely a good one to possibly cut. This is pretty nice if we're able to get a vampire deck going. So we did see some vampire creatures before, so those might get a bump over some of the pirates or some of the other options that we have, just to play something like this. A 3/3 for 5 is not quite worth it, but it often can take quite a bit of life away from the opponent to get you into lethal or alpha strike territory. Um, 3/3 for 5 again is not amazing, but being able to give another vampire +2/+0 is definitely nice, especially with tokens if you just want to go in to start pinging creatures off, getting some damage, or being able to use that lifelink to stabilize yourself. This, I like the idea of it, and it seems like it can definitely destroy an opponent quickly, as long as we keep attacking. Not being able to do much on turn 4 is tough, but hopefully we have a few things on the ground first. So right now I'm going to toss it in, and we'll see what we end up doing with it. If we get enough Explore, Lurking Chupacabra is just amazing. I haven't seen enough Explorers so far in my deck, so I'm not sure if I want to run this completely, but we'll toss it in to see how everything else looks. This is just a nice way to use smaller creatures to take out some larger ones, so it makes sense to keep this in the pile for now. Especially with 2 of them, and I do know that we've got a few token generators, so this might be worthwhile keeping. Menace is nice. It is a little expensive, but the Explorer could be good, especially if we find enough else to keep it operating with the Lurking Chupacabra. There are enough creatures with power 3 or less in the set, so any sort of removal I'm a fan of, especially if we have 2 of them. I played with this over the weekend as well. It was always a serviceable beater. The drain wasn't super impactful, but it was just nice. It's pretty much just a Windrake with an upside, and since I've got 3 of them, it'd be pretty sweet to play them. They are vampires, which diminishes the Chupacabra a little bit, and some of the other Explorer creatures, and the more so the Anointed Deacon. No, not the Anointed Deacon. No, they do really help the Bishop of the Bloodstained compared to some of the other synergies. So that's something to be mindful of. And black is looking like we could almost run a mono black deck if we get some low carve things. So we'll want to be mindful of that, but that could be pretty fun. Ruthless Knave could be serviceable as a 3/2 for 3. I don't know how much the sacrifice a creature comes into play. If there's enough tokens, it could be sustainable, but it's probably just going to be a 3/2 for 3. So I'm going to leave it out for now, and if we need something for the curve, we can definitely toss that in. Here's the Ruin Raider again. We might be running a pretty quick deck, so it might be worthwhile to put in. And the card draw is always nice. We definitely want to include the Captain, because even without any other pirates, it's worth it just to potentially be able to overrun it just by himself. And if anything, it's just a 2/1 menace for 2, which is amazing. Here's another good low-cost creature with an upside of creating a treasure token if we need it. The Plunders, if we're playing enough of a pirate deck, or if we're running blue to get enough of the treasure tokens, this definitely makes sense to play. If we're not doing it, sacrificing a creature might not be worth it, so we're going to hold off on those for now. And this card is definitely an include in a vampire deck, just because on turn 2 it's attacking for pretty much 2 unless it gets blocked, which is pretty nice. So it is one of the better 1-drops, I think, especially if we have a vampire synergy, which we've got quite a few vampire type cards going for us. So I want to see how that'll all work out. So moving on to red here. The Enrage is pretty nice because it means that this card is always going to get in for damage, so that sounds like a good thing to include. Trove of Temptation just doesn't seem like enough of a card. They're either attacking in, or if they're not, losing one creature isn't going to help. Maybe it helps with attrition a little bit, but it would also requires me to be holding back a lot of cards. So I'm just not a fan of it, even if it does get us a treasure return. So I'm going to hold off on that for now. Maybe we put it in, but it's unlikely. Demolish, we don't need to get rid of land, and there aren't too many artifacts. And if anything, that could just be a sideboard card. So I'm going to hold off on that for now. This is a really good burn spell. It is a sorcery, so it's not as flexible, but the raid cost lets you take out most creatures in the set, which is really nice. And again, it's pretty easy to end up attacking in to be able to trigger something like that. Sifting isn't great, but it is something that could help us with the card draw, so we can toss that in. Frenzied Raptor is pretty aggressive. It's going to die a lot to some of the early creatures, but it could help keep the pressure on or make them trade for a not great creature while some of your other better creatures get in. This could be great in a dinosaur deck, which we haven't quite been seeing enough cards to support, but a 2/2 for 2 is fine, and if we can attack in with it as a 3/3 because we drop a dinosaur, then that's just really nice. In a pirate deck, this is really nice. Even without having a pirate deck, it could be really helpful, so let's include that. I'm still not a fan of the enchantments, though more people are saying that these are fairly good, but 2/2 and haste just isn't quite what I want, but maybe it's something that we toss in at the end depending on how our deck ends up shaping up. The Raptor Hatchling is definitely a good little card. It deters them blocking it, or if you have it up as a blocker, it deters them from attacking into it unless they really want a 3/3 green dino. So I find it pretty worthwhile. 2/1 for 2 with haste is serviceable. It never quite did enough damage to me over the weekend, but in the right deck it could punish slower decks, but it is going to fall off somewhat quickly. But it might be able to swing in for 4 to 6 damage if you're lucky, which might be enough just to put your opponent on the back foot. The Firebrand, another decent bear with pseudo fire breathing, which is pretty nice, but it's not a must-have. And Dual Shot is only good against tokens, or as an enrage trigger, which we don't have a lot of enrage, so I'm skeptical about being able to play this. So far, red is looking not great. There are a few burn cards, but it doesn't seem like there's a lot to support it. Blue has a lot of treasure generating and a few bounce and a few unblockable, which is good, but it isn't amazing. White seems serviceable. It does have 2 removal spells, which is pretty good. It's got stuff to clog the board. Well, 3 if you count removal spells, if you count Slash of the Talons. And it does fit in with black, which seems to be our front runner of pretty good cards. A lot of nice little pieces, and it's got quite a bit of removal with Vanquish the Weak. We've got 2 of those. We do have the Cutthroat, which allows us to deal damage, or to kill a creature that has dealt damage. And there's a few other things that are pretty nice for that. So I'm getting excited about black. Moving on to green. A 4/4 for 5 isn't great. Being able to block a few an extra creature is nice, but just not completely worth it. But we'll toss it in here to see how serviceable it is. The Snapping Sailback is pretty cool. It is a trap that most people are going to see from a mile away, but it's pretty nice to be able to have it on the board or lurking around uh, for any time that you might need or might want it, so that way it comes in as a flash 4/4, and more often than not, it's going to be a 5/5 by the end of the turn, which just makes things difficult for your opponent. It's pretty cool to have both or two of them, so we'll toss that in. Any more, and it's going to start to get hard to sustain them. Not super thrilled with a 2/2 for 4, even if it does have hexproof. And we're not really strong with merfolk, so I'm not seeing a reason to include this. In the right deck, this ramp card could be pretty good because you do get a counter if you're able to play something low. And then you also have the ramp portion of it for later on. There isn't a ton of flying or enchantment, so both of these, or all three of these, I feel are just going to be sideboard cards, so we can hold off on those. This is a great ramp card, 2/2 for 3. In a lot of cases, especially with some of the legendary lands, it could go a little bit further than just untapping a basic land or effect. Fog is not quite worth it. The hexproof is nice, but it's unlikely that you'll need to give hexproof to multiple creatures in a turn. Explorer is nice, but an 0/3 for 2 just isn't what I want to be, but it could be a board stall if we need it. Deep Root Warrior is definitely a nice bear, because it means that they have to be blocking with a 3/3 or something with 3 power to be able to get rid of it. So it is often going to be able to get through in the early game. And Communion with Dinosaurs is pretty nice, but we don't really have enough dinos to sustain it, so I'm going to end up cutting that. Looking at our multicolor, Call to the Feast is pretty nice to be able to get 3 vampire creatures. That and the Queen's Commissions means that we've got a lot of vampire creation, which is really cool. It really helped me out over the weekend, just by giving me a few extra bodies that either clogged up the ground or allowed me to go wide. So I'll definitely want to keep that in. And looting is nice, even if it is just a 4/3 for 4. That's a little bit better than vanilla, even though it is in 2 colors. So I'm going to put the amulet in for now, depending on the kind of spells that we end up getting for it. It could easily be cut, but it might be a nice play. I don't think I'll be playing the Chalet because 3 mana for just a generic colorless rock is not what I want to be playing. The Dowsing Dagger, I definitely would like to play this, just because the ramp is good, or even if not, giving a creature 2/1 is really nice. If I toss that onto any of the tokens, I now have a 3/2 lifelink vampire, which can just go a long way to chipping away at the opponent and making sure that I'm always in the game. This surprisingly did some work to me over the weekend. An opponent was able to toss it on some early aggressive cards like Raptor Companion, and I made it that so I could not block them easily until I was able to stabilize in the air. So it's a good card, but I'm still not a fan of playing it for now. It just seems like too much mana for not quite enough, but that could change depending on how things shake up. And Prying Bar, the +1/+0 isn't great, though creating the treasure tokens is nice, but it does have to contact with the player, so this I think will only be an inclusion if we go with blue and we have a few unblockable creatures. So that's the quick overview. Unknown Shores might be okay as for mana fixing, but let's see what our mana base looks like in a little bit. So I'm definitely going to nix green because there's just not enough there to make it worth it. And that leaves us with white, blue, black, and red. Red I'm not thrilled about, but it does have 2 removal spells, but one is double red, and the other one hits everything, and we're likely to not be in just a pirate deck. So I'm thinking that we nix the red as well, just to make things easier on ourselves. That means that the Marauding Looter is going to be nixed as well, just because it doesn't seem to have a good place in our deck. So that leaves the white with the blue and the black. So I'm leaning towards going white-black because the tokens and the smaller creatures that are in the white deck definitely help out with things like the Cutthroat, the Bishop of the Bloodstained, and things like that. So we definitely have a lot of vampire support, which will be good. Though it means that the costly plunders won't be quite what we need for it. So let's quickly take out the blue. The other thing that the white has for going for us is it's got 3 removal cards, whereas blue doesn't have any removal cards. These pirates are serviceable, but they're not really going to get through very often. The unblockable is quite nice. The spy is good. And the river sneak is good, but the rest of it isn't amazing. Not that these are amazing, but they give a little bit more flexibility and a little bit more synergy. The melody is nice, but I would prefer to go with more of the removal than those pieces. So let's cut the blue. Hopefully we can leave it in a nice pile over there. And now we're looking at 30 cards, and something that might be good. So from here, I usually like to split it off to sorting by converted mana cost to see the curve. And it looks like a decent curve. The fun reason why I'm still happy to leave the Primal Amulet here is that if we could copy Vanquish the Weak, or Call to the Feast, or the Queen's Commission, or even the Boneyard Parley, is that would give us a pretty nice effect. To go with it, to just duplicate all of those impacts, but it's still likely that it's going to get cut, because I don't think there's quite enough spells. We've got 19 creatures and 11 other, and we're probably going to be cutting down a few of those, making it so that way it's just not where we want to be. So looking at this, I'm seeing that there's a lot in the 4 slot, and the Looming Altasaur, while nice, is just not quite fitting in with the deck. So let's take him out for a moment. Since this is a Vampire Cleric for 3/2, it might make sense to just toss this in for the moment just to see how things work out with it. Cool. So looking at the top end of this, we've got the Queen's Agent, which it is a vampire, so it might stick around, but that's something that I might cut. The Sunrise Seeker is not amazing with the synergies that we're looking for, but it does help with a lurking Chupacabra. Are there any other Explore cards that we have here? Nope. So we might be able to sustain the lurking Chupacabra, because we do have enough Explore cards, which is pretty cool. Not something that I was expecting, but it is making it so that way we've got a few more creatures and things floating around that I'd like to see. So let's look at the Raptor Companion, and let's end up cutting that just because we have a few other bears, and we do have the this guy here, which is a vampire soldier and can be aggressive, maybe not as aggressive, but at least it's a little bit more in line with everything else that we're trying to do. We do have a decent amount of life gain, so that could help this guy out. So the card draw is pretty nice, but we aren't looking to play a super aggressive deck. We're trying to clock them out, so I'm actually leaning towards getting rid of that for now. So this deck has the ability to go long, which is why it's nice, but it's just a little bit out of the ordinary. But let me see if we want to keep it around. With the removal and everything that we have, the Boneyard Parlay sounds good and sounds like it might be worth it. So we've got that going for us. I definitely want to keep the Bishop of the Bloodstained. The Anointed Deacon could be good with all of the smaller creatures that we have going on and some of the other effects. We've got the flyers, so we definitely have enough creatures to sustain this. Yeah, this is kind of tough to figure out what else we want to cut from this, just because we have so much. Given that we've got the Sky Marches, the Queen's Commission, I'm going to see what it looks like if we get rid of the Inspiring Cleric, just because that doesn't seem to be servicing as much of a purpose for us. The 4 life is nice, but it is just a 3/2 for 3. It is a vampire, which is good, but there's other things that I think can be a little bit more serviceable. I still like both of these just because they are smaller bears. This one should get in for something, and the ability to create tokens, pirate creatures with menace, is pretty cool, especially if we have things like the Dowsing Dagger to help us out, and a decent amount of removal to get rid of other creatures. I don't really want to cut these out just because it'll really help with the Chupacabra to have, you know, we've got the 3, we've got 1 Explore, 2 Explore, and 3 Explore. Though if we take those out, it does get rid of some of our removal or our ability to play around with things, but that would put us right where we need to go. Though we could also take out the Primal Amulet, just because that's probably not going to hit anything when we need it to. And while I like the Parlay, I don't think it's quite what we need either. It is a big effect, but I think we've got some other good effects as well. So we can get rid of that. And this is making things look a little bit better for us. So if we can get rid of 2 cards here, we should be good to go. We definitely still have a lot at this 4 slot, so Raider's Wake could be cut, even though this is a pretty creature-heavy deck, so we might want to roll with that. Since we are trying to keep the Chupacabra up, things like the Interloper are still worthwhile. But we don't want to get rid of any of the enchantments here, and Call to the Feast is going to be really nice if we land that anytime near the Bishop of the Bloodstained. I'm just going to do a quick count to see how many vampires we have to support this. 1, 2, 3, 4, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14 if we count the 5 from the 2 spells, so that makes it 9 without it. So that's pretty good for the Deathless Ancient. You know, that might be a reason to put in the Inspiring Cleric a little bit more, depending on how things go. So we're still trying to take 2 things out. This is a deck where we're going to be raiding a lot, but I think I'm going to end up cutting the Raider's Wake. Well, we've got a decent amount of evasion and everything. I would like to keep it if at all possible. I guess we could get rid of the Dire Fleet Hoarder, because that still leaves us with 3 2-drops, and we've got the Dowsing Dagger. This format seems a little bit slower, plus we can stabilize by destroying with the Vanquish the Weak. So the Pirate just isn't worth it. The Treasure would be nice, but since we're cutting out a lot of high-end stuff, I think we'll be able to manage. And so now we just need to cut one more creature, or one more spell from this. Guess it would make sense to get rid of the Dowsing Dagger, but I still think it'd be pretty nice to have it for the ramp if we get to that point, or just as a decent equipment, since we do have quite a bit of flying, and since we've got all the lifelink, it should definitely do quite a bit for us. This is definitely a tough spot right here. I think I might cut one of these Cutthroats, because while they are really good, we do have a bunch of other damage and some other smaller creatures that could be serviceable for it. That's probably the wrong decision, but I'm okay with it for what we're doing. For lands, I think we can just run with the basic split here. I'm going to go with just a little bit more white, just to make sure that we have it, but it makes sense to go heavy on the swamps for it. So that's my deck so far with this. Stay tuned for